everybody. My name is Michele Seminara, editor of Verity La, and today we are talking to the fabulous poet Toby Davidson. So Toby, I'll just quickly read his bio and then he will introduce himself and also give us an acknowledgement of country. So Toby Davidson was born in Perth in 1977 and grew up in the beachside suburb of Cottesloe. In 2002, he moved to Sydney, then to Melbourne and Warrnambool, where he completed a PhD at Deakin University. He is now a senior lecturer at Macquarie University, editor of Francis Webb's collected poems and author of 2 scholarly studies, Christian Mysticism and Australian Poetry and Good for the Soul, John Kirby's Life with Poetry. Toby has written 2 poetry collections, Beast Language, and the book we'll be discussing with him today, his most recent, 4 Oceans, published earlier this year by Puncher and Wattman. Welcome, Toby.
Thanks, Michele. Thank you. Thanks very much for having me.
Our pleasure. So you were going to do an acknowledgement of country because we're both here on the northern sort of beaches area, and also tell us a little bit about the area that we're on.
Sure, thanks. I wanted to acknowledge that we're on Gull country, on the which is the North Shore of Sydney, right across to about the Lane Cove River. I work at Macquarie University, which is on Darragland, over the other side of the Lane Cove River. So I wanted to also plug this book, which is not mine, which is called What the Colonists Never Knew, by Dennis Foley, who is a Gull man, and Peter Reid, who's a non-Indigenous historian. It came out in 2020, and it really lays out an incredible amount of detail and cultural knowledge about the history of Gull people and knowledge and things like that, right across the entire North Shore. So I think anyone in Sydney should read, or anyone more broadly as well. Dennis is a poet as well, so it was really fantastic to read the book. But I say to everyone, if you read What the Colonists Never Knew, within about 50 pages, your view of Sydney will be radically transformed. It certainly was for me, and I think for many readers that will be the case. I'd like to acknowledge Gull country and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, on land that was never ceded. And so I just wanted to make that clear. I'm still finding out about it as a West Australian, someone who comes from Cottesloe on Wajak Noongar country, and of course I've bounced around Australia as the 4 Oceans collection. As the 4 Oceans collection shows. You can see a lot of that on there. So as always, we're finding out more about the places we are and the ground beneath our feet, and the history and culture and the poetics as well of those places.
Oh, great. Thank you, Toby. That's really interesting. I absolutely will have to read that book. So another book I very much enjoyed, your own, 4 Oceans. So I was wondering if you could start by telling us a little bit about yourself. I've read your bio, but what I'm really always interested in is how on earth people become poets. When did it happen?
It's interesting you asked that, because I was just thinking about this the other day, because I've realised that it's actually, for me, it will be, I think in a couple of months, it'll be 25 years since I started writing poetry as a regular thing. I began when I was about 18 and a half-ish. So I guess in poetry years, I'm quite old, even though I'm in my 40s in some ways. Some people might start writing poetry in their 70s, and, they can be quite a young poet at 75. So I feel like I'm a bit of a battle-scarred veteran in some ways of sort of the Perth scene and Sydney, and I lived in Melbourne as well, and Warrnambool in the country. So for me, it really began in about 1995. I was first at university at UWA in Perth, and doing an arts degree and reading a lot of poetry as well. And it was quite a period of a lot of great changes in life. I'd gone from a very small local public high school to a sort of grand, vast university full of all kinds of people, including people from much wealthier schools and backgrounds and that kind of thing. But they had an incredible library there, incredible grounds, and there's a sense of sort of grandeur of the statues of Socrates there and all this kind of wonderful very old school sandstone university type of stuff, which in a place like Perth really feels like a bit of an intellectual oasis sometimes, because Perth can sometimes feel a bit intellectually constrained. That's not often the reality once you actually hang out with people. But I guess the dominant discourses that you see in the sort of in the newspapers and things like that aren't always massive fans of literature. I think I started just writing in a book. I thought I'd write some kind of diary or something like that, because I was just reading all this stuff and having all these thoughts. And I think it was also a way to process, to be frank, to process what was going on. I was also like a footballer who was falling out of love with football, and I stopped playing the year after that. I didn't know who my friends were anymore, and I didn't know, there was all these social worlds flying around me. And I think it was just a way to hold on to something. So I thought, well, as a way to sort of process all of this change, I'll start writing stuff down, because I'd sort of always done that and always loved literature. And my dad was an English teacher. I'd never been really intimidated by literature. It had always been something that I felt was mine. And I, without self-consciously saying, now I'm going to be a poet, I started trying to write a diary or write something. I'd always sort of written things one way or another. And a diary very quickly turned into poetry. It sort of just fell into poetry. I was listening to The Doors and stuff like that. I was listening to sort of quite involved lyrics. I was quite drawn to sort of lyrics that were dark and interesting and literary. And that led me towards William Blake and Rombo and all of this kind of stuff that Jim Morrison references, as well as many other great poets that I was reading as part of my arts degree. Yeah, I sort of fell into it, and the longer it went on, I sort of felt the power of it, even though I think it took me a lot longer to become a good editor of my own poetry. I didn't really have that skill for quite a while. I would just write something and be like, great, that's awesome, on to the next one kind of thing. But there was a kind of purity to it as well. And I could feel the power when you feel like you've plucked something, or an idea, or even a run of words or something like that. You feel like you've plucked it from somewhere else and suddenly it's yours. And I didn't even know really why it was powerful necessarily, but I knew it was powerful. And there's still a great mystery to it for me, which keeps me going. So that's sort of the long but also kind of short answer, because it's just been a long journey from that. I was sort of notoriously known amongst my mates as the guy who would slink off and write stuff down. They'd be, well, what are you doing? Are you completely nuts? But I sort of did that because I didn't know really how to edit so I knew it was all significant somehow. And I thought later on I'll be able to figure out, how to craft poetry and things like that, reading and learning and that kind of thing. And it did give me, I think, some stability and also a good mental sense of myself, and something of an identity at a time of great and exciting change, but also I think a lot of fear. It was also the mid-90s where there was a great shift in Australian politics towards conservatism. It was sort of the rise of John Howard. In Western Australia, there was the Premier Richard Court, who was also conservative, and there was this conservative clampdown on all the progression that had happened in the 80s and 90s, early 90s. And I think my outrage towards that was part of what was driving me, and probably still is.
Love a bit of outrage. In fact, you've just given me a fabulous idea. I wish I could rewind 20 years. Maybe the best thing for poets to do is just really write, for the first 10 years and then just go back and edit for the next 10 years.
Yeah.
When you've got a year of craft and a bit more patience and maturity than to go back and redo the young poems.
Yeah, and what I've done, particularly in the last section of this book, the Cottesloe Nights section, which is all set back in Western Australia, there's kind of three sections to the book. The first is the long train journey when I left Perth across to the eastern states, to Sydney, which was a permanent shift. But as I was taking the train trip, I was thinking this would make an incredible poem in a way. So I was trying to write it down, but also it took me, as I said, 18 years to complete it. But So that's the first section. Second section is kind of the eastern states kind of section. And the third section is sort of returning as almost a partial tourist to the place I grew up in Cottesloe in Western Australia. And some of the contents in that were written in the late 90s. They were responsive. So I was kind of re-editing and but also kind of reconstructing in some ways sort of parts of those poems which are over 20 years old. Because I would walk around Cottesloe at night. There was no one else around. I sort of had the place to myself. With sort of me, the ocean, and the stars kind of thing. And it was, and I would be, I always have notepads with me and pens and stuff and writing things down. I'm now sort of in the East to stay more or less, although I do sort of still describe myself as a West Australian poet because that was really what made me a poet in some ways. I think I was sort of shaped by Western Australia. But I think coming back to those things, one of the reasons for writing that sequence was I just couldn't sort of live in the East permanently without having this last sort of reckoning, if you like, with that I grew up in that really made me who I am. So the last line of the poem talks about the sort of this final sunset poem of Sestina, which talks about the sun setting as kind of my beginning. Because of the huge raging sunsets that you have there in the West, across the ocean. A bit like in California, people write about the sort of blood red skies and that kind of thing of the sun setting. It took some time to get used to the sun rising out of the sea, which I can see. But that was going back to those early, some of those early pieces and trying to say and to write them now as, someone, 25 years older.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's get stuck into talking more about the book. So as you said, the first section, Indian Pacific, so doing that fabulous, that's dominated by that long sort of poem. And in that you sort of do I found it quite real, your description of that journey. And I'm sure because you were sitting in a non-sleeping carriage, I think.
Don't make that mistake twice. Yeah.
So you're sleeping for many days as you travel across the centre of the country, from one to the other. I'm sure it did become quite a surreal experience in many ways, just because of lack of sleep and just constantly seeing that changing, flashing, environment past the window. But one of my favourite poems from that section is actually the very first section of the book. I was wondering if I could get you to read that one for us. What's it called again? Hang on, let me get it. It's terrible, isn't it? Turn Back.
Turn Back, yes.
Yeah.
And I think we had a sample of some of the poems this early poem on Verity La. We had a small sample of this, so people can, if they want to see the poem itself, the way it's laid out.
That's right.
Well there, but you can see it's sort of in these sort of long to sort of shorter lines, which have a sort of well, they can mean a few things, I suppose. There are all kinds of different experiments in form throughout the book as well. And there are sonnets and sestinas and pantoums and even a deconstructed haiku and a few other things throughout. And the Indian Pacific piece is written in these tercet pieces. But this is the first poem of the collection, Turn Back. And this, I don't want to say too much about it because I do enjoy mystery and I think people have their own takes upon things. But I thought, firstly, for a long time that I was going to begin the sequence with the Indian Pacific sequence, and I almost do, but this is almost the prelude to it. I thought it would be interesting to begin a collection with a poem titled Turn Back, to basically say to the reader, just turn back now, don't just walk away from the collection.
That's how I read it. It seemed to me the kind of a retroactive poem, maybe the older poet looking back and talking to himself as a younger poet in some senses, and also warning the reader, like you're in for a ride. That's how it
is a bit of a disclaimer, but I do think perhaps there's because I wasn't forced to leave Perth. I chose to. I was in my mid-20s, and I had one friend that lived outside of Perth who lived in Sydney, my friend Marty, and the final collection of that sequence is Marty at Last, when I do sort of meet him over here. I thought that was the time to go east, as many West Australians do, or overseas. There is that sense of it there. There's also, as with a lot of poems of mine, there are echoes of other things going on, and there are echoes in this of asylum seeker policy. There are echoes of also anti-drug policy and the sort of the narratives around that as well, and they sort of cohered into one lyric, if you like. I sort of wanted to have that as a beginning, almost prelude to the collection as a whole, but also to the longer sequence as well. Okay, so I'll read it. So turn back. You have come in the least of your free time to hear, for no fit reason and against the predominantly unconscious wishes of reasonable people. They would have you decide, what's the point of it? Surely it pays to err on the side of prose. Don't fall through the cracks in lines from a friend. You won't know what's in them. Worse yet, you'll get on. Absorb only under strict medical care or that of your innermost homeland minister, or find you once had a storied future, then things were in the wind. You were seen with poetry, jaundiced, spare, second-hand even, a neighbour flared. Settlers and soldiers' ghosts are no excuse. Thou will launch into anything. All right, and that's the sort of launching poem, I suppose, to the 24-page sequence.
Yeah, fabulous. One of the things I really picked up in that poem was the comment about the gaps, not falling through the gaps. I found that, especially the poem that follows, it is written, in many different segments. And so there are a lot of gaps, naturally there's no headings between different segments of the long poem. And it struck me that it was very train track-like, and that it was very rhythmic, that whole sequence as well. You picked the rhythm, that of being on those hypnotic train rides, really beautifully with the rhythm. And I was really interested in the sense of that in this first crossing, over from west to east, it was very much more a youthful, exuberant sort of excitement, and very quite surreal, as I said, but also a sense of sort of skidding across the land, but there's a lot going on underneath, which starts to, a lot of history, a lot of dark history, starts to poke its head through, not so much in the first section, but it's foregrounded there,
Oh, certainly, yeah. And that first poem, Turn Back, before we get into the sequence, yeah, you're right. It's set in those sort of short but also shrinking kind of tercets of the three lines. Through the collection, the stationary pieces where you're sort of hopping off the train at, Kalgoorlie or Cook, the halfway point in the Nullarbor, or Adelaide or whatever, the tercets shrink to a more stable existence, if you like. Whereas the longer pieces, when you're on the train with that metronomic run, it sort of does draw out the lines to this long feel. And yeah, as I was writing the notes, the halting sound of the train at different paces as well. It gives a sort of a halting, but also kind of jarring, sometimes skewing rhythm as well, because it's not entirely smooth. Those sonic screeches and stuff. If you look at a couple of years ago, SBS did a slow TV version of the Indian Pacific train.
I saw it.
And yeah, you can actually hear the sounds in there. You can hear that. Actually, I listened to that very late again as I was doing the editing as well. You can hear this rhythmic sound, but also the screeching and the halting when the track's a bit rough as well. And you have also the train announcements coming in, things that you see that fly by. All of this stuff is sort of melting together. And as you said, the history is rising up, because as you get further into the desert in particular, you get into the dark secrets of the country in all kinds of ways. And that starts to boil up as well, because the train is partly a tourist train. You have a lot of retirees taking it for the experience of it and that kind of thing. And you get these official announcements like, here we are on the wheat belt and we're heading to Kalgoorlie where, there was all this gold and typhoid and here we are with this great new nation and, isn't Australia wonderful and so on. Even at a younger age, I knew better. And there was a deep kind of irony to that, knowing some of the darkness that is there. You go past, for example, in South Australia, you go past the Maralinga, not the site of the Maralinga blasts, but you see the keep out prohibited signs. You see broken old fences of farms that have basically vanished back into the dust. You see rabbits running everywhere. You see all of these other kinds of tangible reminders of what's gone before. That is part of the more complex story that we, have to be honest about. So I've always been a political poet to some degree, and that's part of the DNA. I can't really rub it out. But you also have these people that you meet on the train as well. So that it all kind of washes together. With you hear the things people tell each other as well. You get a real sense of class system as well. I was in the red kangaroo section, which is those who don't have the sleeping arrangements, because I just didn't have much money at the time. I was sort of in a sleeping seat. And you do get a sense of those who are sort of in the more luxurious mode of it and those who are around the riffraff, and I was definitely with the riffraff. But you'll get a sense of it as I read some of the halting sense of it as well. Would you like me to read a little?
Yeah, I was wondering if you want to do something different, but one of my favourite ones, I loved it because what I really liked, besides the sort of visual, sense of the visual imagery, going by, was definitely that sort of oral sense, all the announcements. I didn't realise, that would have been really evocative, hearing those announcements about, as if you're a coach, and to your left, it would have been really bizarre. But one of the things I loved was the Aussie vernacular all the way through those poems in particular. It was it was just really part of the music of the whole experience. And I think it was called One Day In. I think it's on page 19. It was one of my favourites. Yeah, that would be great if you could read that.
Okay, thanks for giving me the page number. Because I've had this to myself for so long, it's still so strange to hear, to know that other people are reading it. I've got this in John Curtin's Life with Poetry as well, which isn't a poetry book, it's a book about, I think the first literary biography of an Australian PM. And I've had this just as my own world for a long time, so having other people read it now is pretty amazing. I think, here we go. So this is the sort of waking after the first day. So the first day you kind of get to from Perth, you get to about Kalgoorlie. It does remind you how huge Western Australia is. Physically going across it, a lot of the journey is getting even to the South Australian border. You sort of stop off in Kalgoorlie. Well, this is how when I took it. And then you head out into what's known as the longest straight track in the world, which was sort of right across between Kalgoorlie. And then you sort of wake up on the Nullarbor, like a Nullarbor moonscape as well. I might read the poem before it, and then the one with the Australian characters. I love a lot about Australian vernacular because it's more poetic, I think, than people give credit for, and sometimes it also has deeper and darker ironies built into it that the speakers don't even realise that they're saying. But because I kept notes on particularly of what people said to me on the thing, this is all verbatim, and I do wonder where these people are now. I mentioned them just by first name, of course, as well. So you have this mixture of sort of Aussies, some Americans, some Dutch people, and British as well, and mostly Aussies in this. But people have time to sit with each other on this long journey. They do start just telling you their life. Just whoever you are, you just walk into one of the cars and someone's telling you their life. Someone's telling a whole group, holding court, telling their whole story, because they have a captive audience, quite literally. But I might just start with the piece before. None of these have titles as you run through, but sort of waking up on the Nullarbor. So suddenly, after this sort of night of kind of I go through these dream sequences and things like that, you sort of wake up because the sun, with the Nullarbor, there's nothing to stop the sun just breaking out over everything at once. So it snaps on and suddenly it's drilling into your brain and you're awake and you're looking out and it looks like the moon. It's just rocks and a few shrubs and birds are probably the only things that tell you that you're on Earth. And you're sort of in the middle of that. So, I started thinking about the explorer John Edward Eyre and also Wiley, his Noongar guide as well. In the middle of that, there's a whole note section, so I won't go into that. But I'll just start with the waking on the Nullarbor piece and just the sense of that, and then on to the wake up with the breakfast with character, as I put it, with these fellow people that you end up just finding about their whole life as this sort of cinematic world scrolls past behind you. And yeah, you've got the sound of the train. I was also listening to a lot of electronic music as well, which I reference in there, like Underworld and stuff like that, which is also weaving in and out of it, but it's just not so much in this section. Okay. We wake to a Nullarbor moonscape's endlessness of cairns and runes. No ignoring it. Seats resets. Larry cocoons hatch. Threadbare scrub prompts a tenuous earthliness, even then withdrawn. I snatch a pen and rub my face. Few slept well. 200 k's south, a pittance here. Eyre observed such startling reality to paralyse the mind. His lifeline wily, watching on and on. We blast along board and immortal sand, catching our minds, rolling eyes in extremis. Cobalt blue, high and mighty 180 scans a limestone offering plate which rounds on itself for flightless crumbs, this silver speck with its pained cicada sound. Groans of the sleepers, inward, down, reprise their joint body language. A distant alien tree moves with us, like a bird or car, then stops stock still. Commanded? Who can tell? It's all a matter of spacecraft. In the next section, one day in, few hours on the piss, saw heads at a brekkie with character. Wal and Bruce once worked the bush, Wal survived bowel cancer. Bruce bolts down his bacon, stares mid-smack. Geez, this is native country. We're nowhere near civilization till we see a fence and some bloody sheep. Rhino, a TPI Vietnam vet with the Southern Cross on his great blue gut, holds court. They want to replace my hip and my head. When I got back, bike north, live wild, catch your dinner each day, touch of paradise. Rangers roll up, 2 kids, see my gun. You in Vietnam, goes one. Yeah, so what? He says, mate, we've 3 more like you round the point. Matty, more duffer than ruffian, trades Valium. Steve is picaresque human tobacco, did time in Indonesia, China. Yeah, that was stupid. Shanghai was the worst. Rachel, a Minnesota teacher, gleams. Did you know if you dig up the average American after 9 or 10 years, their decomposition's barely set in because of all the preservatives? She's fervently organic now. Outside, it's 10 million years young.
Great. Killer last line there.
Thank you. Much work done. Killer last line. Thank you.
So you've gone across the center of the country for three days. Does it take to?
Yeah, it's 3 full days. Which has its biblical resonances, of course. It is. It's three full days, and different people come off and on. Especially at Adelaide, a whole lot of people changed over, and you do see a lot of the country. There's also a lot of that's where the like rocket ranges and stuff like that are out in the middle of the South Australian desert as well. And of course, there's no hiding from the stars and the land there. It's right in front of you. It's overwhelmingly large to the point where you can't bear it. And straight after that, there's the halfway point, Cook, which is this tiny town. They have these miniature little stops named after various Australian leaders. So it's not James Cook, it's Joe Cook, who was the Aussie Prime Minister in the late 30s. And in the middle of that, there's this, things were so quiet there because it's just the desert. The further I walked away from the train, it was so quiet, you could hear ants moving in grains of sand. It was so unbearable to some of my other passengers, they headed back to the train because the sound was so powerful. I loved it. I thought it was amazing. So there's, in that I sort of talk about the amplification of that, and how every atom spans a gong. You can almost hear the air ringing. It's so quiet. And I've never forgotten that. And that also made me decide that I had to write this because so few Australians experience that level of quietness in the language. Almost this loud quietness, I suppose. It has that that paradoxical power that is sort of that is awesome in the original sense of the word. It is almost overwhelmingly, terribly powerful, and you can't mess with it. But you also, this is going on every day. Like it is a layer of reality that that is before us and after us, and is sort of timeless in that way. So sort of humbled and lucky to be there.
Shock when you landed in Sydney, moving to the centre section of the book, the Eastern States, and then you meet Marty.
Yeah, a lot of people have remarked on this, and I just sent it to him, actually, my friend Martin Kovacs, who lives in Thailand now, and I finally sent him the collection. And that's sort of the first sort of landing in Sydney poem. He likes it, luckily. I didn't tell him I was writing it until I'd finished it, because I would have been horrified if he said, but he actually caught the train across before I did. And that's why he's the only friend I had outside of Perth, and I'd known him, I couldn't remember even meeting him, but we'd known each other since we were 3 or something. So I knew he wouldn't let me starve. I had not much in the world, and I knew he had a job and a house, and that he was renting and a few other things. And quite a few people have remarked on this. I've got a very nice quote from David Malouf talking where he on the back of the book, where he quotes about that, with memory as a toy to tamper with and how. That's after this long journey, this is almost like the prelude beforehand to turn back, almost the transition into the world of Sydney. And this and a couple of the other early poems from Eastern States sort of remind me that when I first came to Sydney, I'd come here briefly as a tourist with my family when I was about 10, but I was seeing it with these really alien eyes. I wasn't very well travelled at that age. I hadn't seen much of the world. So this was easily, the biggest city I'd ever seen. I found it absolutely terrifying, but also so strange. And I even, remark about Sydney-siders as they at one point. Like the whole thing just seems so massive, and it was so blank to me. Some sections still are perhaps blank to me. But I really had no sense of, very little sense of the history. I knew that it would take a long time to find my feet. And just the general level of sort of public competitiveness was so much more with the bigger population. And I think this was you sort of get these descriptions of these first views of Sydney, of going across the Harbour Bridge with Marty, and him trying to sort of tell me how to prepare myself for living in this bigger city and how crazy it can be.
Read us that poem.
Yeah, sure, okay. So this is the last poem of the Indian Pacific section, but it's actually its own poem. It's not part of the main sequence. So you've sort of finished the train poem, and the poem itself finishes at Sydney Central as the train kind of comes in. And that's why the first line of Marty at last starts, "The doors hiss apart." So, here we are, kind of thing. He was working for a coffee company owned by the Sahados and a few other things. And he was this is sort of all drawn from our conversation and just those few initial things. The final line talks about in parts of Sydney, particularly in the north, there are still what they call silent policemen or silent cops sometimes. Do you know what I'm talking about? The little UFO-shaped
over many,
metal things. Yeah, I didn't know they existed at all until Marty basically crashed into one. I was like, what the hell is that? And it's a chunk of metal sitting at the bottom of a T-junction to make sure people kind of don't cut across and go around it. But also the paint's chipping off a lot of these. They haven't been repainted, many of them, and they're impossible to see. And so I freaked out when he hit it. So it was interesting to have that as sort of the jolting last part of this sequence. So, I'll read this. So it's sort of in this alien city with very little to my name, having sort of radically changed places sort of finding almost this this oldest friend of mine as kind of this guide, kind of the Virgil to my Dante at this point. So yeah, I'll read it for you. So it's called Marty at Last. The doors hiss apart and there's Marty, a mate I've never known not to be there. We met before I held memory as a toy to tamper with and how, at playgroup in the lore of two families and since of each other's reality. I shone at inviting myself around, now to this hitherto mythical city I breezed through once as a child. We're equally crumpled, black-haired and brown, laughing through tubes of echo and shadow, phalanxes of public despair. In the company car, coffee by the Sahados, Marty warns me it's crazier here. 5-way intersections, summer storms, get stuck in a tunnel and you're a lamb to the slaughter. His windscreen beeps in shrill ascent and we're lifted in bumping lanes of sheet music, connective crescendos of girders, beams. It's weird how fast you learn to ignore it. Marty sardonically loves his boss who clocks off after the Monday rev-up and old reps odes to the Paul Hogan days in tobacco, King's Cross on the company card. I'll stick to trains in a sea of ink, hit independent bookshops for shifts, my casual life on A4. I wrangle a word from Marty's order pad. Tarman, and that's just the start of it. He swings us down a purple portal, crashing off bumps they call silent policemen.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, I really enjoyed this section because I enjoyed seeing the area that I've grown up my whole life in through your, as you said, alien eyes, and seeing how it appeared, even down to, I suppose, the ocean is different on the other side to start with.
Yeah.
Sunsets and the animals. You have all those beautiful poems in there. The creature quatrains, are they called? Yeah,
that's right. Yeah.
So it was like you were really like, wow, look at that. It was fabulous. Yeah, very fun.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, and there's it just sort of strikes me now, looking at bits of things like his windscreen beeps in shrill ascent. That's an E-tag on a screen, which I'd never seen before. And he didn't tell me that existed. So halfway through, driving up to go over the, somewhere along the line anyway, over the Harbour Bridge or just after, suddenly his windscreen just beep, like that. And just even something like that, if you've never experienced it, it's fundamentally bizarre. And it's just, but you're sort of in this rolling series of strangenesses, which are cosmically different, but also different in a very everyday way as well. Two are sort of meshed together. And even driving over the Harbour Bridge, which I call sort of bumping lanes of sheet music, he's sort of telling me how quickly you kind of get used to all this sort of large, incredible, monumental stuff as well. The jacarandas of the north, the purple portals, that they have sort of these roads, and just all of it was this sort of to my eyes and my sensibilities, I get the opposite effect now when I go back to Perth. I now see things in Perth with sort of not entirely in the same way, but with a degree of alien eyes now, just from being apart for so long. Well, there are things that remind me, like I'll go out on the streets of Cottesloe at night or something, and I'd be wondering, why would I walk around at night? And I'd go out there and it's like, well, firstly, because it's beautiful. And particularly after a hot day, no one can sleep anyway, but also there's no one around, in a lot of these suburbs. If everyone's inside, you won't actually bump into another soul. So there's no danger. There's no, what if I bump into someone crazy, particularly, for me as a young dude, I guess. And I would hang around places like the Cottesloe Civic Centre there, which is this huge series of parks and stuff like that I referenced there, which I used to play hide and seek in as a kid. So if you got paranoid enough, you could just run off into there and they'd never find you. So there was, the other, when I was there recently, I always get reminded how dry it is over there because it's much greener over here in the east. And, one of the first lines of the Cottesloe sequence is sort of the yellowed weeds and things like that you see, and sort of even the wash of trees in the wind there has a different sound because the leaves are so dry. You get this sort of rustling, wind chimey kind of sound, which is also kind of silver in the moonlight, and quite sort of awe-striking, it's to see. So you do get an opposite effect of that, and there's I wanted to write the Cottesloe night sequence at the end as almost sort of the last sequence of me as a local from that place. The last sort of essence of
Yeah,
that.
definitely. Well, let's stick with the middle sequence section just a little bit longer, because one of the things as I was reading, first I was struck by all the excitement and the big eyes and ears at seeing everything, new, and then it's there was a kind of a darkness that crept in, and a sense that all that glitters is not gold. Sydney's known as a bit of a glitzy city, and but there is a dark underbelly to it in terms of maybe things I sensed in your book that you started to sense, some greed, corruption, problems with climate, the sense of being on, once again, stolen Aboriginal land, that unacknowledged, that was committed, and that everyone was just building their glitzy big homes and lifestyles on top of. Is that you sort of were aware of as you were writing the poems, that darkness was coming through?
Yeah, I was. It took a while to actually understand the exactness of certain sites and places and things like that, and I had to sort of put on my my sort of scholarly research hat in some cases. For example, the first poem of the Eastern States section is called Sydney Central Again, so it's sort of returning to that place that I was there, which talks about it as it was also the site of the Sydney Central train station, where the Indian Pacific comes in, but also that's used all the time, was formerly, as well as of course being Gadigal land, it was also the site of the Benevolent Asylum, where not just people considered crazy were sent, but also unwed mothers and anyone that basically had been carved out of the society, particularly of the late 19th century. So in this poem, which I don't need to read it here necessarily, those things are in there, but it's because it's so disorienting, that fed into the poem. So it's actually a poem. It's in, I'll show you there, it's in 2 columns like that, but it can be read sideways or down. So there's actually 2 ways of reading it throughout. So it actually creates this disorienting effect. And when I read it live, what I've started to do is to read it 3 ways, to actually bounce around the poem first and then read it down like that, and then read the longer, more cohesive version. So it becomes increasingly coherent, but it starts with incoherence or perhaps more free association. And that sort of happened by accident, and it was it's extremely difficult. So I don't know if I'll ever do something like that again, but it's sort of, I was trying to replicate and I do this often, not just in the words, but in the form of a poem, how things present to me in the world. There's a way in which things are either disoriented or moved around. In the Indian Pacific sequence, for example, there's a poem about a baby at Adelaide Station there, which, if you look at it carefully, you can see the first half, the poem, the words from the first half of the poem are then reconstituted into the second half. So each of the words sort of happens twice to create this other kind of meaning. And there's a lot of these sort of experiments with the form, but they're not just experiments for the sake of experiments. These are the way that things hit me, and ways of sort of understanding and perhaps reconfiguring the cognition of particular truths that are hitting you, that you almost need to bend, sometimes perhaps even to break language to get to, rather than just being satisfied with language presenting itself as a singular authority. This is what's real. Here it is in a paragraph. Bang, bang, bang. To actually to break that up and disrupt that in various ways and create new possibilities.
I love that. Yeah, fabulous. One of the poems that we published in Verity La, I think it might have been the first poem of yours we ever published. Yes. It was on it. I wondered if you could read that. Still one of my favourites. Professor and the Unnamed Stalk the Post-Apocalyptic Wilderness. That's a fabulous title. And I thought that poem kind of the book at a sort of a turning point where things were becoming a little bit more dystopian. Your vision of Sydney as the skies got red and full of smoke, probably with the terrible fires we had. And there's one poem at the very end of that section which probably I think refers to COVID, to do with masks. There's a sort of a sense that there's something not quite right in the state of Sydney. There's some pestilence or something, something starting to push up into consciousness. And I thought that the professor captured that really good.
I mean, Sydney, I very quickly understood there's a deep dualism to Sydney, as there is to many cities. But I think Sydney is really enhanced because you've got the great amphitheatre at the harbour, this glistening, sparkling blueness that'll sort of take your breath away. The natural landscape of not just Sydney, but all of the East Coast in particular has this kind of arresting, deep beauty and magnificence and depth and awe to it. But at the same time, it also, it has it. I think I figured out quite early on there was some dust storms and things like that at the time and also I think like every now and then if there's a car crash or the roads shut down and there's or the trains shut down, and I got the sense of Sydney is quite an apocalyptic city. And I realised Mad Max 3 got there before I did, and it's been shown many films like that. Because it does have this thing of everything is perfect until it's not. And it's almost like one thing can go wrong, and not so much with perhaps also with the landscape, but also with the society constructed around this natural beauty. It's almost the feeling of like one thing can happen and the whole system breaks down and suddenly everyone's fleeing for their lives and trying to scurry home, and shut the door and hide until there's a sense of
tenuousness, what's being built is being very superficial. It's like sandcastles, it's all very glitzy and lovely, but not terribly permanent necessarily. And there's not a lot of resilience there. There's not deep roots in the land. And so, as you say, if something goes wrong, everyone just loses their shit, basically.
Yeah. And there was also something I found really in the Sydney mentality. And again, it's not just Sydney. Every city does this. I think it happens in Perth as well. But I think it is quite enhanced in Sydney to some degree, just because the stakes are that little bit higher, I suppose, with the size of it and things like that. Is that it's almost like if you acknowledge how quickly things can become almost apocalyptic, or how quickly the roads can collapse, or things can shut down, or the train system can suddenly go offline, or all of these kind of calamitous things can happen, or suddenly you have dust storms, or you have bushfire smoke suddenly happening. Because that can always seemingly happen, to actually acknowledge it is almost inviting it. So people don't like to talk about it, and I've got one line in there in one of the other poems sort of saying that, that no one in Sydney plans for it to rain, for example. That's something that really struck me, that there's no plan B. There's no, a lot of houses are built without any awnings or anything to hide under in case of rain, unlike, say, Melbourne, which is a big indoor culture, and because they're expecting it. It's kind of like it never rains in Sydney. There's a line in there, it never rains in Sydney, or there have to be awnings, contingencies, some kind of indoor culture, which is, I just felt like putting it in there. It's almost inviting that. But this, the Professor and the Unnamed was actually a proper dystopia. So this was sort of projecting into a sort of a post-disaster future. So it's the only sort of dystopian piece I've done, and as a sonnet as well. So it's sort of projecting beyond whatever disaster it might be. I mean, I do talk about pathogens and climate and a few other things. It's a very long prelude. I should probably read it, right? And thanks for publishing this in Verity Lane. And it came from just me and my partner Erin talking about, in the this dream of in the post-apocalypse, we've been watching various post-apocalyptic films. We'd have these cool names, and we'd be, this sort of fantasy that we'd be these great survivors and all this kind of stuff. And I'd be called the Professor, and she'd be called the Unnamed, and we'd have like shaved heads and all this. We'd wearing furs and all this kind of stuff. So it sort of fell into this, but it perhaps draws on a larger sense of that apocalypticness that I could see.
In this part of the book, definitely,
Yeah. Okay, so, the Professor and the Unnamed stalk the post-apocalyptic wilderness. So much is silent beyond sand and men, with pronouncements, low strains whipping at our boots, furs, exposed skin slipping from remnants, quietly when fierceness can't stand the pathogen of recollections, ravenous gripping. Now we hunt lizards, rearming, re-equipping in this arrestedness once called unbroken. We surface no more to the grey names of lovers, but flit, intercept, miniature as a shadow, death through heretical ruins of the plateau, lacing to cradle our breath again, as moss seeps lush from a crevice, recovers a beauty which misses us as we did oxygen.
Excellent. Thank you. Nice to hear you read that one.
Thanks. Yeah, it's actually it's changed a lot, as you saw, with just because perhaps of the form with the sonnet. You're dealing with a compressed piece, but also the sense of despite it all, a greenness returning somehow, despite all that we've got wrong. The men with pronouncements telling us that everything's fine. That political frustration I have about that, but also looking ahead to here we are now. This is what we do. This is a day, in the life of people coming after, the sort of flitting through the ruins, looking for food and equipment and that kind of thing. I also get a sense of that from even video games I was playing at the time, like Horizon Zero Dawn and things, which are set in this sort of post-apocalyptic kind of world, which can be, it can be a bit of a fantasy, the post-apocalyptic sort of writing, and it can take you away from the importance of the present, but it can also warn about the present, I think. But it's kind of, deep down, it's kind of a love poem. It's kind of a love poem between two people, but it's also kind of a love poem about the actual world and the natural reality of a place, a beauty which misses us as we did oxygen. These people almost still can't breathe in the air, but they can see a beauty in the world trying to reconnect with us and with the world that isn't lost, that is still coming back. So there is a little bit of hope despite all the horror in there as well.
Yeah, and that was one thing that really just was throughout the whole book, from east to west to middle, your attunement to the natural world, as you said, tiny level, ants and sand shifting up to, huge ocean waves and so on. There's a real attentiveness to that throughout the whole book, which kind of, I found it very unifying, because a lot of people feel, that the east and the west of the country are like two different countries,
Yeah.
And a lot of people's imaginations who haven't been there or don't, know better, there's like nothing in between, and so there's a sense that you're unified in your vision of the country through this attentiveness, I think, to the overarching sort of natural world, especially the oceans.
Yeah, that's right. And I deliberately called the collection Four Oceans because, of course, it's the Indian Ocean, which I grew up with, and has this incredible bioluminescence to it and this greenness to it, which is quite different to the Pacific. And of course, you have the sun setting in there. And then of course the Southern Ocean, which I'm running parallel to on the train, but also when I lived in Warrnambool on the southwest coast of Victoria, I saw up close, and there's kind of a whale poem there later on about sort of the southern right whales breeding there. And then of course the Pacific, which I now, can see out my window, living in the northern beaches, but also the ocean of the desert, the ocean of the interior as well, the desert as an ocean of sand at time. And I do think that's often we have, particularly, Perth is the most isolated city in the world. It's still, most Australians don't tend to go there until they're a lot older. They go overseas, but they don't go to the West. People in the West often go to, they'll go to the East for a while, but they'll eventually return to have families and things like that. A lot of my friends have lived in Sydney but don't anymore, or they've lived in London or Europe and they've gone back to Perth. And there is a sense of that poetry world being its own world. But there are some incredible West Australian poets who've come out, some of whom live in the East, Philip Salem and Mal McKimmie and many others that I'm in contact with. Graham Miles as well in Tasmania. These West Australians who are sort of Eastern West Australians. I guess I'm one of them as well. There's almost enough of us to do an anthology one day. It would be quite interesting, actually, because, of course, many of us are sort of unknown or semi-known to a lot of West Australian poets as well. And I do parachute back in there every now and then. I'm going to go do a Perth launch for Four Oceans. just and also to see what's going on. Yeah, there isn't obviously a lot of publication opportunities and things like that exist in the East. A lot of those opportunities come out of personal relationships and friendships and contact. A lot of West Australian poets don't have those connections. Perhaps they do more than they used to in some ways with social media and so on, but they don't have that level of, someone telling you, I'm doing this upcoming anthology, please submit something. You don't have that degree of sort of contact and publication. I mean, there's still only big publishers, medium-sized publishers in Perth, UWA Press and Press. It can be very hard to sort of get out there as a young poet. And I didn't really publish much myself until I came over east. I think we do miss out on some really good West Australian poets. We do get some anthologies here and there, and we have Westerly, and so there are forums. But I think a lot of people don't know that there are in the East quite a few East and West Australian poets who've spent decades writing in the West who now live in the East, particularly Melbourne. There's a few, and we live in this double world, I suppose, which is fantastically interesting. But you sort of feel like in some ways you don't have a bedrock in either in degree.
Yeah.
You do have this mixture of visions of ways of seeing the world and even the land. Of course, the western 2/3 of the country is geologically older than the east, and less fertile and less green, and it's more ancient. If you sort of grow up, that does seep into you, and the hard light that you get out there, and sort of the uncompromising kind of cosmic reality of it, which kind of mixes also in with the sort of small town politics and all kinds of things as well. So it can be a kind of a world of its own. So I'm now that I'm firmly in Sydney and not likely to head back to the West any stage soon. I'm increasingly trying to find ways to make Sydney home, and a way to delve into that is to consider their history. I've got a poem called "At the Non-Existent Statue of a Speared Arthur Phillip" for when I lived in Manly, and it talks about that really early colonial history and those colonial moments where Arthur Phillip was speared at Manly, quite close to where the Manly Ferry comes in. And people don't know about that. I mean, that's something that I certainly didn't learn about at school. I learned about it first from the First Australians series, and I was like, wow, I didn't know about that. And then I realised, when I was watching that, I was like, that's just round the corner because I was living in Manly, and I was, just putting it all together in terms of the amphitheatre of history as well. The beauty is a way to get a stronger grip on where you live and to start to claim it as yours. If you can be honest about it and try to be honest about it, it's a way, and accepting it kind of warts and all. You can build some kind of authentic attachment to it. And feel it.
That's really interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting, Toby. Yeah, you're right. You can't just build sandcastles. You can't just throw one civilization on the top of, especially the destruction of another and continue on. You have to, if you want to actually, as you say, feel that you belong to a land, you've got to be honest and and
Sydney, particularly Sydney Harbour, is the site of the original colonial felony. It's where Cook came first, but also you have the first Sydney colony being set up under Arthur Phillip and just rocking up, and everything that sort of rolled out from there. Which I won't go into detail because you can get it in What the Colonists Never Knew. But the thing is, the further you get away, from something happening often in history, you have more information about it. So we can actually look back now with much more information than people had in the 1950s. People had in other eras. And we now know more, and we have more of the voices of the people who were impacted by that. And so we now can better understand that, and then, to move forward, collaboratively, but also with our eyes wide open, and also you can't have a thin history. You've got every country has stuff it has to deal with. Every country with their colonial history particularly has stuff to do. You've got to be real about that. You can't just wrap yourself up in the flag with a Union Jack on it and pretend it's all going to be okay.
Exactly. Now, was this this sort of desire to see something with more maturity or have some sort of reckoning with your hometown? Is this what led you to go back to Cottesloe and to write about it in the last section of Four Oceans?
To some degree, yes. I think, when you come to that third section after the sort of, in the book, Eastern states are not just in Australia. There's a trip to China in there and across the Pacific, and these larger sort of states of the East, I suppose, and to some degree some Eastern philosophy and religion and things like that too. But I think with the last sequence, with the Cottesloe Nights sequence, I felt that part of making Sydney my home is that you feel the roots, particularly the poetic roots, I suppose, from where you started withering. You feel them dying. And I wanted to capture what I had from when I was younger, but also no one's written a long poetic sequence about Cottesloe, for example. There hasn't, but it is such a, to me, it's an incredibly poetic place. It's a place where where you have these, particularly in summer, you have this, roaring, blazing 40-degree sun that dies in this atomic sort of, incredible sort of psychodrama every day in the sea, and everyone gathers to the sea to kind of watch it, and to dunk themselves in the ocean. It is an incredibly dramatic and poetic place. And wandering around it at night, in these nocturnes, I kind of have the place to myself. It's just me and and the land and the stars. And I do talk about the sort of the history of not just Cottesloe, but also of Rottnest Island, which you can see across the ocean, and you can see the lighthouse on it. And I've sort of visited there many times, which, like a lot of West Australian kids growing up, I went there on holidays and stuff. And then as an adult found out that it was a prison for Aboriginal people in particular. It's called Wadjamup. It's Noongar name. And it also has another history, of course, before the oceans, rose so much, where you could walk out there. So realising that there's this place, you can see it in Sally Morgan paintings and stuff about that, about Rottnest, where you have people holidaying on top, and underneath there are all these buried Aboriginal people underneath. And just that dualism that's there. I think poets have to get into that and to understand that, as a non-Indigenous poet, you don't claim Aboriginal knowledge, but that those meeting points of colonial history and of course, many Aboriginal writers talk about the colony as present as well. You've got to try to delve into that. You've got to try to understand it. You have, when I originally started off as a poet, I was just like, hey, let's experiment with this, let's try that. But I realised quite early on that people were taking what I said really seriously. And I thought, well, if they are, I should as well. And that means sort of trying to deal with those uncomfortable truths that live, in a place of great beauty. You can have a great darkness, and the two coexist in all kinds of surreal, grotesque, brilliant and challenging ways. And you do get these sort of reminders fished up from the sea. You get these, whales watching from the sea. I
wanted to ask you about this. This is one of the questions. There's a lot of sharks in the last section, huh?
Yeah.
Is there that was discovered in, I'm not sure if I'm saying that properly, an ancient shark that was discovered in the 70s in the oceans around there. And I was wondering, what is the symbolism of all these sharks lurking around in the book?
Yeah, there's sharks and whales throughout, but particularly for the Cottesloe Night sequence, I draw on the Megamouth Shark in particular. That wasn't discovered until 1976, and it represents many things. I mean, there is a shark at Fremantle Maritime Museum where they have it. It's a deep sea shark. It has this giant mouth. I chose it for a few reasons. Firstly, it was discovered in the year I was conceived, so there's an interesting sort of symbiosis there, perhaps. I make a sort of an offhand reference to that. But also there's a sense of, sometimes writers or thinkers or philosophers and things like that are told by the wider society, shut your big mouth. You think you're better than the rest of us. If you don't like it, leave. All those kinds of things. We're used to those sort of censorious kind of defensive attacks. So I do have a big mouth, and I do, was conceived around the time the shark was found, and it also, so I took it as kind of my symbol a little bit, and it does appear not just in the Fremantle Maritime Museum. There's the Megamouth Shark as kind of this almost this god from another world. But it also appears later on in a ghostly form. It actually reappears in a ghostly form with a younger version of me, sort of imagining it coming down from the sky, kind of as a companion throughout. And I do have a lot of strange, ghostly and creaturely companions throughout. But I took the Megamouth Shark as an example of something until recently we didn't even know exists. And there's a lot of that in the sea, and we shouldn't imagine that we know everything about everything. We like to tell ourselves. So I do like to bust a lot of these things that we tell ourselves, sometimes comforting things that we tell ourselves, which aren't ultimately true. And, just to use, particularly creatures and their reactions to things, to remind us that there's a greater meta reality, which we're sometimes, scratching at the surface of.
Yeah, very much so. It felt like the ocean was bigger than the land in the last section of the book, and that these deep sea creatures just observing humans scurrying like little ants around the edges. That was what I got. I was wondering if you could read one of those poems, which gave me that sense. It's called Tracking. It's around page 78. And that was very much a sense where it felt like we were being watched.
That sort of defensive response you get from some, occasionally from people, if you ever suggest changing anything about Perth or even other cities, towns, often a defensive reaction is, if you don't like it, get out, kind of thing. Why change anything? So, if you don't like it, get out of your system a little bit. So this is the one where where Megamouth reappears. So Megamouth appears earlier in its chamber of ooze in Fremantle Maritime Museum with its mouth open, so anyone can see that. But it sort of appears in its ghostly form. It also came out of this dream that I had of this strange kind of almost hostage exchange, where all of the fish and things that were eaten by the people living by the sea sort of rose up in their bones, and their sort of flesh reappeared on them, and they sort of flowed back into the sea. And then all those that the sea had claimed, particularly fishermen and people who drowned, and all kinds of other people, reappeared and sort of walked out from the ocean, dripping wet, and sort of walked back almost to their homes. And that was something I had that was one example of something from the late 90s that just stuck with me. And I couldn't just leave it there. I had to sort of write this out of me to almost to say goodbye to the place in a way at the same time. But also I've got a younger version of myself at 18, actually. So I've got this sort of, when I first was starting to write poems, I'm sort of writing back to it at the same time. One thing you'll notice with the quite a slow sequence, just before I get to it, is that if you read across all the titles, it actually spells out a sentence as well. And that's just something that's sort of just came naturally as well, that sort of binds the sequence together. I'll read this one for you. It's called Tracking. Don't like it, leave. Pedestrian spray at a faint zebra crossing has a bit each way. Outlying waters strike and whip, paralyse the distant ships, setting them from where they queued to suckle the horizon. Megamouth floats over years and cars, trails spectral greens less ghostly than I'd find myself, 18 and oversubscribed in intelligent life, hugging a coat down a dead marine parade. The freak shark slows agape to a hover, swivels fins to dive, kiss the earth. A single fish skin nudges roadside, fattens, spinning to tide. More toothpicked bones wriggle down. Then, crest by chin, the seas taken begin. Sloshing Hessian grins and caps, trudging, slapping on wet backs. They return as in a dream, which, not too cruel, both loved and left them clear, never knowing when they started. Oh, yeah. There's a lot in there. I just remember that, the emotion of the dream there. But there are, particularly in this one, there are lines which probably date back to 97 or something. I mean, it's one of those, it's got some of the fragments of some of the oldest lines in there.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a bit of an archaeological site, this book, but things are in. So I was going to ask you about the chronology of writing it, of chronology that's presented, in the way that the train ride Sydney back again. But you've answered this somewhat throughout, but it wasn't written in that way. You've plucked bits and pieces, and there's many layers, many sediments of personal history as well as the history of wide Australia and the land as well, all sort of layering over the top like a sedimentary rock.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. And really, I had my first collection, Beast Language, came out in 2012 and is now part of the Five Islands Press sort of online archive that they have, which is great. So it's out there for free. But the poems from that and the poems from this are written mostly around the same time. It's just that those from the first collection were ready first. They're the ones that sort of managed to congeal into something solid a bit earlier, and the others, I used to refer to Indian Pacific as the dreaded train poem, because I never had a poem just beat me up so badly for so long, and I thought I might, who knows if I ever finish it. So I needed the extra time. I needed, another 8 years on the rest of it to bring it together. And part of the brief for me, finishing this book, was to clear out the cupboard, really, was to really say, from this point on, everything you write is new. Everything else that's sort of clinging on to you from your, writing journey, if you like, it's either in the book or it's not. You either let it go back into the sea, maybe, or, it gets written into something. And, so anything that you can't let go, you have to make something now. Anything that you have to decide to let it go, so that you can be in the present finally. And you can start to look forward and start to write as someone your own age, as well as someone, from ages.
Yeah, that's right. Because when you are working and reworking poems that were written some time ago, when you were a different sort of person, a different sort of poet, really, it's sort of a retroactive experience, I suppose, and it is like a bit of an archaeological dig on yourself and your past emotions. Yes, it could be quite heavy and quite relieving to be able to sort of close that chapter, literally close that book, and go, okay, so, now I'm free to go on and create in a different way. So, given that, what have you started something new? I know you've also had your book about your great grandfather John Curtin and his poetic, life as well. That's come out recently. What else have you got coming up?
It is. I've been really spending most of this year sort of almost like on the campaign trail, because I've had the two books. Four Oceans came out in November, and there's the other one. Here it is. This one, John Curtin's Life with Poetry, from UWA Press, came out in February, March. So I've sort of been out, doing interviews and talking and launching both books at the same time, which has been interesting because some people read both and they cross over and so on, which is great. And there are a few oblique references to Curtin in the Cottesloe Night sequence. So I've been mainly doing that, and at the same time, because I'm a bit of a compulsive as a writer, I'm always doing something. My partner Erin knows really well, and she's very good at picking when I'm drifting off to which is wonderful. She can have that sense of I'm about to disappear down the rabbit hole kind of thing. So what I've been doing is doing what I really used to do, because I've been working off computer so much doing editing and stuff like that, is actually going back to writing by hand in a large notebook. And I've just got like a very large notebook with everything that I've, sort of written down as ideas for poems or particular lines or partially written things. I haven't had a lot of time to formulate whole poems. I think it would take a little bit longer. I do notoriously take a long time, but I'm hopefully going forward it won't take as much time, I suppose. We'll see.
You start the cycle over again, starting back with the notebook and taking down the pieces that you see, that you hear, the cycle.
Yeah, things as they come to you, even if they're not complete. Very few things come to you complete. So I've just been writing things down, and I filled up a small notebook. And I think eventually I'll do some kind of large writing retreat to actually see, okay, what's solid here. You do need a bit of time for things to sort of percolate themselves and sort of decide what's going to matter. So there's certainly material, but I just wanted to go back to that style of just handwriting, writing by pen, writing all over the page, chasing things sometimes over the page and, changing it. So that's sort of where I started. And so I've been doing that a little. So I'm hoping in the next few years there'll be little dribs and drabs, and then a third collection at some point. I want to, now that I've done the John Curtin book, I want to focus a lot more on and I have a lot more space now to focus on being a poet first and foremost, which is what I was before I was a scholar as well. That's really, what I've been really trying to just to flesh out in a very natural sort of organic way. I mean, I'm not someone that gets stuck in an initial sense about what will I write or anything. Things come and you just take what's there, you see what you can sort of fish out of the waters, if you like, or what's something that comes to you that sticks in your brain that just won't let go. My particular style is to try to see what comes to you and then listen to what it is and how it might be something. Sometimes I'll try and there will be a concept that you try to then work on, but I don't think, okay, this is going to be poem X and I've got the title and then I'm going to force the work to fit the title. I go from the work first and then it becomes what it becomes and sort of tells me what it wants to be. So I try to sort of listen out in that way, whether you call it the muse or whether you call it just, imagination or the brain or the unconscious or whatever it is. I think anyway, poets, where possible, should try to sort of, to listen and just take that sort of absorption and don't be afraid of what comes to you, even if it's in another voice, even if it doesn't sound like you. Perhaps even better if it doesn't sound like you. And if something comes to you that you can take that you feel like you've taken from somewhere else, like you've sort of somehow ended up as almost the custodian of something rather than something that you've sort of forced into creation. Let the poems decide what they will be themselves as much as you can, and then see where that takes you. That's what I try to do as much as I can, and that's probably why I've taken so long with everything.
I think that's fabulous, Toby. I mean, often these days, I think it's been 9 years between your first collection, Beast Language, and this one, which, these days people would feel is quite a long time. Everyone seems very keen to, if it's over 5 years, no worrying, But I think it's lovely, that sense that, you really have to let the work settle and you have to let it come together organically. And you're not just trying to push it out just so that you can, keep your name relevant or whatever it is. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that can be a bit of a trap. And look, people work in different ways and some people can work like that. But sometimes people will try to force things a bit and you can feel that forcedness, if you like, in the work. I won't name any names, but there are certain poets that I
and it doesn't do anybody's work any justice, I don't think.
No, and you're not doing it justice yourself by saying, oh, well, I need to, bust out something. Some people can't believe that Indian Pacific took me 18 years, but it did. And because I probably wasn't a good enough poet to write it when I first experienced it. And I had to get better before I could write it. And I had to go through all of that because I was certain that it would be a poem and it should be a poem. But I had to reach its level, I suppose, for what it would be as kind of an Australian epic. There are some long train poems and things like that written, but nothing quite as long as this, I don't think. So I'd never done a long poem of that style, and even also doing things like sestinas as well, which are sort of cruel and unusual punishment. They just take a long time because you have to tell the story. You have to say, what am I saying here? Also, what's coming through. You know, the longer, like with any art, the longer you can take, the better. I don't know how that will be going forward. Perhaps it'll be a little bit faster because I'm a better editor and crafter of the work itself. But I think the process is more or less the same. I think it's just, you know, what you see and feel in the world and what sort of comes through to you as someone who scribbles stuff down. And they will find their own forms if you give them enough, if you give them a good listening, if you give them enough time and space. And try not to rush because it will show up in the work if things have been forced a bit. But again, different writers are different. Some sort of can work like that, but for me, and I also tend to like other poets to take a long time as well. So because words are tricky, but also you've got what words sound like, what they say, the etymology of them, what they imply. There are all these giant mine shafts to words that you've got to consider, and sometimes something will feel right or wrong, and you don't know why, and it can take a long time. So that's sort of my style. Can I finish with one short poem?
Sorry. Yeah, of course. That'd be a fabulous way to finish. Thank you. Go for it.
Sure. I won't do my little pandemic haiku. It's very, very short, but it's I wanted to finish with one from the West, which is a little bit like the Creature Quatrain series, which is all these sort of voices of creatures, often saying barbed things back to humanity in various ways. Hopefully some humour as well. I try to have some wit and dark humour at times as well. This is called Gull. It's a seagull type voice, if you like, but it also goes into its own higher realms, perhaps, from the West. And maybe it's a bit of a I just thought of it to read because it perhaps does fit the writing process. It's almost a muse-like warning about rushing things along. So it's just very short. It's called Gull. As a flock's wide one formation, motion wiles itself from the one. For one more turn of the wind and sun, we would pass your face through the peering froth, a falling dream, a flying dream. Shake! If you catch the ghosts of fish to pocket them in a higher stream, be careful what you wish.
I love that. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for talking with us today.
Oh, no worries, Michele. Thank you for having me, and I hope people, enjoy Four Oceans and just, I think poetry generally. I think there's at the moment there's kind of a golden age of great writing going on that isn't getting enough of an audience. Verity Last helping with that for sure, and things like that. But I think there is a real greater curiosity about what Australian poets can do and what they say, and sometimes how politically they are, in not just in terms of the everyday politics, but in terms of the greater kind of metaphysical politics of things, and what poetry can suggest. I mean, at the non-existent statue of a speared Arthur Phillip actually imagines a statue of Arthur Phillip being speared and talks about it like it's a real thing. And maybe one day it will be a thing, but it's actually imagining something as if it is real and conjuring it as something that is real that perhaps we need. Yeah.
I love Your poetry is conjuring, you know, it is. It's
Thank you.
It's a
like that little baby at Adelaide Station, just, you know, conjuring air. You see a little baby holding their little hands. You know, that was the image that I took from that. So that's what I'm trying to get.
Well, I feel like through Four Oceans, you've really taken your time. You've given the country, you know, and our culture and society a great amount of respect, as you've given it a lot of time, and you've really memorialised a lot of places in Australia, which I think, you know, when you look back at some other Australian writers, and then you realise that that person has visited a place where you go, whether that be like, you know, Manly Beach or, you know, Cottesloe or whatever. It's always a little thrill to see the places we know imagined and reimagined through a poet's eye. Four Oceans.
Absolutely, and that's something I wish I'd done earlier when I first came to Sydney. Is I wish I'd read, you know, Christopher Brennan and Francis Webb and Kenneth Slezer and you know, even Judith Wright's poems about Sydney, and of course all the you know, Indigenous writers who are you know, coming through in the 80s in particular, writing about Sydney as a site of all kinds of things, and I think that would have mapped out the place for me in some ways. Other poets had been there, and I've been very interested in that idea of sort of mapping your world through poets and knowing other poets have been there. And I think we need to commemorate more poets publicly and more writers publicly, as an, you know, just so people don't feel like there's a blankness there. The reality is, you know, literary people have crisscrossed all through here, you know, and I think knowing that for people who are, helps the overall reception and respect for literature in Australia, but I think it also tells particularly young people who are starting to imagine themselves as writers, you're not alone, you're not the only person to have done this, you're not the only person to have felt these things, and you need to sometimes connect with those older writers and poets and their thoughts as a kind of companion to moving through the place you're in. So here's to that.
Oh, beautiful. Okay, thank you so much, Toby. And so I really urge everyone to go get online, go out, buy Four Oceans. It's from Puncher and Watman. We'll put the links below the video, and I hope everyone rushes out and grabs a coffee. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michele.
Bye.
Bye.